Hey, how we doing? Welcome to Your Successful Retirement. And I specifically want to talk about your successful retirement today. And this is it's a bit of a concentrated episode. I think everybody can get something out of it, but I'm really going to talk to the people anywhere from 1 to 5, maybe even 10 years from retirement, and probably 1 to 3 years into retirement, because whether you realize it or not, retirement is the most difficult thing you will ever do in your life. Ironman triathlon, actually really easy. Going to the moon, all right, that might be a little difficult. But in terms of our life events, there is no more difficult life event. And I don't want to sound crass with this. Is my mom has, I just forget how she puts it, but and it's not nice when she says it. And I understand, but I don't always mince words. I don't always try to sugarcoat things when I'm trying to get a real truth across. I just kind of say the words. And my mother goes, she just cringes, and I feel bad for her. I feel bad for me. It's kind of tempered how I talk to people over the years. My mom's 83. So I've learned over the years, but I can see if we're in a group and I'll say something just very bluntly, and she'll just kind of give me that, just got hit in the face with lemon juice look. But let me be a little blunt. There is no other permanent decision you'll ever make. There isn't. You think they are, but they're not permanent. So let's take the easiest one. Buying a house. Buying a house is a big deal. You got to save all this money. You've got to commit to this mortgage for the next 30 years. And if you're not happy with it, you can sell it next year. You may declare a loss on it. You may have to figure out how to deal with that loss, but it's not permanent. Marriage. Now, I've been married for 32 years. I hope to be married for another 32 years to the same person, by the way. It's not permanent. If you screw it up, like royally screw it up, you pick the wrong person, you didn't see something, or something happens afterwards and they change, there's a mechanism to get out of that situation. Even kids, and this is where it gets a little funny, even kids, eventually they will grow up and leave. If you do your job right, they will eventually grow up and leave. So there's an end date to all of those. And your end date to retirement is your death. So making that mistake means having to back up all the way. You can't wait for things to get fixed later on. You have to back up to the working years, and that makes it really difficult. Let me tell you a little story. And this is going back a bunch of years. It's got to be going back 30 years. Years ago, I did seminars all across the New England region for various groups within the telephone companies, quote unquote, whether that was 9X, AT&T, or their associated organizations. And one of the associated organizations I did a lot of seminars for in my time were the telephone pioneers. Now, some of you may be aware of them. They're now the pioneers, not the telephone pioneers. They're not affiliated necessarily with the telecoms. But they're a charitable organization and kind of a fraternal organization, at least at the time. And we would do seminars. And I did a seminar. It was either White River Junction or Brattleboro, Vermont, the eastern, southern kind of side of Vermont, because somebody wanted one. And I was perfectly happy at the time. I'm 20 something years old to drive up there. So I drive up there. I do the seminar on retirement for retirees. And this gentleman wants to meet with me afterwards. So I schedule another time to go up there a couple of weeks later. And I meet with him and I sit down in his kitchen. He's got a beautiful home in middle Vermont. It's about just at the end of winter. It's pretty outside, all of that. And we're going through his finances, and we finally get to his 401k, which he's left at the company, which was common back then. It was very common back in, say, 92, 93, 94, to leave your 401k at the company, because the 401k was a dinosaur compared to today. And I don't mean dinosaur like really old. I mean like really hard to get out of the ground, like that bad. It was, you have no idea. If you're under 50, you have no idea. It was things like you had 3 investment choices. You technically had 4, but you had 3. You had the company stock, you had guaranteed interest, and it used to be, it was only 2, the company stock and guaranteed interest. And they were magnanimous enough to add what was called diversified equity, which was an S&P 500 fund. And then if you were with the company prior to 1984 and divestiture and had AT&T stock, there was a regional bell category that owned the regional bells. You could only sell it, couldn't buy it. So, but there's really 3 investments. And if you wanted to take a withdrawal as a retiree, you had a couple of choices, but it was either take it all or don't take it at all, which is foreign to everybody, whether you work for Verizon or AT&T or IBM or XYZ University or whatever, especially if you're having Fidelity manage your 401k. They don't care. They'll send you 3 checks a day. They just don't care. It's not a big deal. It's excess processing. Back in the day, companies were managing their own 401ks, and the telephone companies by far way too late were managing their own 401ks. So if you wanted $1 in retirement, you take the whole thing. As an active employee, you could take money out. But as a retiree, if you wanted $1, you had to take 100% of it. So you either took the whole thing and rolled it over, and it was your job to roll it over, or I think you could annuitize it over your lifetime, basically turn it into a pension. And then the last choice was to take the money over either 5 or 10 years. And I'm looking at this gentleman's statement, and I can just the math is easy. Is he's taken out about 20% in the last year, give or take. So I asked him the question. I said, you're taking distributions on this? And he said, oh, yeah. I said, you retired about 5 years ago. He said, right. I said, okay. And I broke this man, and I feel awful for it. But he had to know. Better to know then than later. And I said, well, in 5 years or 4 years, whatever it was, you're not going to get any more checks from the 401k, from the savings plan, which is what they called it back then. He looked at me like I was crazy. He was like, no, I keep getting checks the rest of my life. I said, no. Your pension lasts the rest of your life. Social Security lasts the rest of your life. This money in this account, which was about $80,000, so he was getting about $16,000 in distributions. I said, this money in 5 more payments is empty. And he had used the money to put an addition on the house and to spruce it up inside. And he bought his wife a nice new car, and he did some landscaping outside. He was blowing that money like he was going to have it forever. They were taking vacations. They were doing all of these things. And I'm colorblind, so it's hard for me to see this. But in this case, so for instance, my daughter was just in with my granddaughter. My granddaughter's teething. And she's like, oh, her cheeks are so red. I'm colorblind. I don't see it. I don't see nuances like that in colors. Her cheeks look like her cheeks. That's just how I see it. This guy went visibly white. I could tell he went visibly white. His eyes got gigantic. The color drained from his face because he realized 5 years into retirement, in 5 years or less, he was going to have a major adjustment in his spending. And that's a scary place to be. And more than likely for him, I will say this used to be a thing in telecom, used to be a thing in a lot of companies. And what I think happened was he was not a very good manager of his own money during his working years, but he was part of this. I'm going to use one of those words everybody uses these days, cohort. He was a cohort, which I thought was usually a guy that you committed a crime with. But now it's like a group is a cohort, and it drives me bonkers. In his cohort, whether it was, the guys in a garage that were climbing poles or equipment installers or whatever it was, telephone operators. Remember we had human telephone operators. Is they all kind of got hired at the same time. They all went through the careers at the same time. They all retired under the same, class of quote unquote. He was thinking it was the class of probably 88 or 89, which the back then telecoms specifically would just make these massive offers to just cut payroll. They just needed to cut payroll. They knew they were bloated and they needed to cut payroll, and they were just trying to get rid of people. So an entire department would retire because they all had 30, 31, 32 years, and they all just up and left the same day. And that's going to create chaos in the company. I won't even get into that one. But he was part of that cohort, and he just retired. And the difficult thing is he's kind of stuck with everybody else is doing all these things. And I want to do those things. And he's not sure. He's never checked if he has the money. And that's scary. He probably didn't have the fears we're going to talk about today, because he probably just skated into retirement and didn't think about it because everybody else is going, I must be okay. Today, things are different. We're very individual. I'm not retiring with 15 of my peers anymore. I'm retiring, making a decision on my own. And it's a very lonely place. And the fear is, what if I run out of money? what's going to happen. And that manifests itself in a bunch of different things, things like, am I going to have to settle for less in retirement than what I'm enjoying now? I used to see this quoted in Money Magazine and places like that a lot. I haven't seen it in a long time, but the statistic is still out there, and I'm sure there are people that are still misquoting the statistic. And the misquote is that people spend 80% of what they spent in their working years during retirement. And according to Social Security, that's not what Social Security reported. What Social Security reported was that people's income in retirement was about 80% of what it was when they were working. Ergo, they spent about 80% of what they were spending in retirement versus when they were working. That doesn't mean they wanted to. It means that's what they have to spend. Because if you had a gigantic 401k or a gigantic IRA and could take more money and spend more money, wouldn't you? Of course you would. People spend 80% because that's all they have. And that's a big fear of, well, I may not have enough to go do the things I did, or worse, like this other gentleman. I've seen this several times. I've seen this example is, my friend who's older than me retired several years ago, and he had to sell his house, and they're going to take a chunk of that money and they're going to put an in-law apartment on their son's house, and they're going to have to live there because they don't have any other money. They need the rest of the proceeds from the house to kind of run their household. And now they're kind of stuck, and they're attached to Junior. And there's nothing wrong with being attached to Junior. Is this whole we're our own people and not part of a family group is really a very 20th century type of situation. My grandparents had my grandmother's parents living with them, and that's just assumed. And there was always big family get-togethers and things like that. It was when before I was born, the thing is that you always go to Phyllis's house. That was my grandmother. You go to Phyllis and Bud's house every Sunday. Every Sunday, my grandmother cooked she wasn't sure it was going to be 12 people or 25, but people would just show up at her house. But that was that sense of family. We don't have that sense of family now. Because we don't have that sense of family, it can be very tragic to be forced into a situation where you have to sell your house and move someplace cheaper, or have to sell your house and move in with your children because you can't make it otherwise. People having to skip or cut back drastically on their enjoyment in retirement, whether it's trips or a second home or a boat or a car or just experiences. And that's the big thing these days. Cutting back on that's no fun. But the fear is that maybe I won't have enough money to do that. And probably the biggest fear is what I had to deliver to this gentleman, and what people talk to me about all the time is, I am scared to death that I'll be 3 or 5 years into retirement and find out that I shouldn't have retired. What am I going to do? Because there's no safety net. If you think about, if you're working right now, if you think about it every other week or twice a month or weekly, depending on what your employer pays, money's direct deposited in your bank account. It just happens. You don't even think about it. It doesn't even occur to you. Only if you get laid off does that ever cross your mind that that's just not going to happen. And you cross into retirement and that stops cold. There's no more checks coming in. There's no more checks coming in. I don't care who you are. That is very, very stressful. And knowing that you could be 3 or 5 years in, and you're 3 or 5 years into not having to get up every single morning and go to work. And that's difficult. I remember years ago, 30 years ago, my mother broke her leg. She was 50 at the time. And it was bad. It was like 5 months of surgeries and rehab to get her back to the point where she could go back to work. And even at 50, so not 65 or 68, at 50, she found going back to work full time, 40 hours a week, just 40 hours a week at a desk job, exhausting. Imagine if you're 68 and you have to go back to work. Probably one of the funniest and saddest commercials I've ever seen is back in the 90s. There was a commercial, it was a McDonald's commercial. And you could tell because the little M was in the bottom corner. And it starts out, and it had that fuzzy. Remember that those commercials that were always on film that were a little bit fuzzy back in the 90s, late 80s. I never understood that whole thing. It was almost like they did it on purpose. So I guess it was because it's TV, and TV didn't nearly have the resolution it does today. So it looked silly to us. It looked normal. Anyways, little old man, I'll call him a little old man. He comes out of his house with his cap on and his jacket, his light windbreaker jacket, and his wife gives him a peck on the cheek, and he's in the gingerbread house, and he goes down the stairs from the big front porch and up the street. He walks with such purpose, and he gets to the McDonald's, and you go, oh, he must be meeting somebody. And he goes to the McDonald's, and then it cuts to a bunch of McDonald's stuff. And then the commercial ends with him turning around with the McDonald's hat and the McDonald's shirt on. How may I help you today? And I always had two thoughts. Thought number one is, did he just bring his lunch and he works at McDonald's? Does that say that? Did McDonald's accidentally say something about their own food? But more importantly was, they made it look like, oh man, this guy can't wait to go run down and spend 6 to 8 hours sweating in a McDonald's to come home smelling like a French fry at 68, 72, 75. He looked about 80. But that's, people looked older 30 years ago, 25 years ago. Do we really want to go through that? No, we don't. We don't. Is having to go back to work is awful. And I will tell you that to a person within reason, again, except for those cohort retirees, virtually everybody else tells me, if I have to delay this 1, 2, 5 years in order not to run out of money, please tell me. Please tell me that's how big this fear is. So we've got all of that going on. And how does it manifest itself? It's constant worry. It's not sleeping well. It causes people to second guess their decision. I have 2 clients right now who have pushed off retirement twice because this worry, and we're good with both of them. We've done extensive analysis and they're okay. Just can't pull that trigger. The stress and the anxiety is causing them to not be able to pull that trigger. And I want them to be comfortable. There's no sense retiring if you're going to be stuck in that worry again. The whole point of retirement is to get rid of that worry. It causes people to make bad investment decisions. So you may get more or less by too much of a degree aggressive in your portfolio. You may say, man, I've got to take these risks that I wouldn't normally want to take just to try to grow my portfolio. Or worse, I've got to keep things so safe because I'm afraid that I may miss out on the next big market upswing. So you want to be careful of that. And it causes a lot of people, think about this, when you're anxious, how often do you leap before you look? And that's what tends to happen is people make these snap decisions, whether it's to leave or not, but it is very stressful. And I will tell you that for even my most prepared clients, I don't care how much money you have, really is to get rid of that paycheck, is to leave that safety net. It's going to be stressful. There's nothing you can do to get rid of it completely, but I can kind of help talk about some things we can do to mitigate that stress, to reduce it as much as possible, to help us, most importantly, make good decisions. We want to make good financial decisions. That's our real goal. So when we do this with our clients, this is how we start. First of all, we take an inventory of all of our resources. So a pension, if you have a pension, your 401k, IRAs, investment accounts, Social Security, and kind of put that on one side. And here's our resources. Here's our pile of assets and income that's going to enable us to live for the next 30, 35, 40 years, depending on when you retire. We tend to look at least, we like to get a client at least till age 90. That's a long time, but people live till age 90. Again, my folks are 83 and 85. They might live till 90. I don't know. I have right now, I think 4 clients over the age of 90. That's a lot. That's a lot. It does happen. We want to plan as long as possible, just in case you live that long. The second thing we want to add up is the expenses. So things like income taxes. We got to take income taxes out because every year you're going to pay income taxes, right? Although I hear this about once a year. So I want to dispel this for the people that listen to this. About once a year, I get somebody transitioning into retirement or transitioning to 65, and they say these words to me, and I scratch my head every time. Well, you don't pay taxes in retirement, right? You don't pay taxes at 65. They just stop paying. You just stop paying any taxes. No, you're going to pay taxes forever. You're always going to pay taxes. I don't know where that comes from, but I get that question about once a year, and it bowls me over. It really does bowl me over. I can't believe that there's that much misinformation that people can get that thought in their mind. So taxes are a big portion of your expenses. Debt is another big portion of your expenses. So mortgage, if you have a mortgage still, other debt. Hopefully when you're getting near retirement, you don't have other debt, that money's, that's gone. You've kind of been in a position where you can kind of push that away. And then probably the biggest thing is spending. And I'm going to give you the tip of the week is I'm going to kind of pull the curtain aside and talk about what we consider spending. Because so many people get this wrong. They try to add up. They look in the checkbook and they look at the credit card statement, and they try to add up what they spend money on. And the catch is, it's less so today, is I'm a cash guy, but even in the post-COVID world, it takes a while for me to run through my cash in my pocket. So it kind of takes a bit of time. I can't tell you the last time I actually paid cash outside of my haircut. Yes, I always pay my barber in cash, but like going to a store, I'll just use Amazon. But still, there's expenses that we have that are somewhat irregular in our regular spending. I had one client once a couple of years ago that paid literally everything with his credit card, and his credit card company organized his expenses. So he actually had a very good list of his expense categories because of that. But most of us don't do that. Almost all of us don't do that. He was an exception. I look at expenses a different way. And assuming you're working, you're going to take your total income, all of the money you brought in from jobs, things of that nature, from work and other things you might do. I have a client that umpires softball games. So let's add that in because it's money that's coming in to being spent. I don't consider things like interest and dividends on my investments because I'm not taking it out. I'm letting that roll in. So it's money that's coming into the household, the whole thing, the gross amount. I don't want the net amount, what your paycheck is. I want the gross amount. Now I'm going to subtract taxes. And here's why I subtract taxes second is you're either going to owe or get a refund in April. That has to be accounted for. If I just take my net paycheck, it's going to be off by that number. So I want to take the total income, figure out what the total taxes are, and you can get that right from your tax return. You can get fed and state right off your tax return. Subtract your mortgage payment because your mortgage payment is something that will end someday. And when I say mortgage payment, I mean principal and interest, not the insurance, not the taxes, because insurance and taxes will continue if you even just paid off the mortgage tomorrow. So if I look and I subtract those three, and then I subtract savings. In retirement, you won't have any savings, but as an active employee, being in the workforce, you will have various savings, whether it's just putting money away yourself or 401k or regular IRA contributions or whatever it is, subtract that out. Whatever's left, that's your expenses. That's what you're spending. And I will tell you, at least 50% of people, when I run those calculations, are shocked at how much they spend. They go, no, you forgot to take out that includes the mortgage, right? No, the mortgage is separate down here. Well, that includes the 401k, right? No, the 401k is over here. That's just spending. And somebody will tell me, you're telling me I spend $12,000 a month. I said on stuff. Now, stuff includes auto insurance and homeowners and vacations and, car payments, usually in most cases, and things like that, and food and clothing, everything to run a household. It is a staggering number. You need to know what that number is because you need to compare what your resources look like and what your expenses look like and make sure that your resources are greater than your expenses. This is something that we do regularly for our clients is you can use things like Fidelity actually has a really good, if you work for a company that uses Fidelity for their 401k, you can have access to this. Fidelity's 401k software is great. And the difficulty is it's garbage in, garbage out. Their software is spectacular. But if I don't enter the data correctly, I'm not going to get a good answer. I'm going to get a crappy answer. And I've had clients that the guy that did the credit card thing that tracked every single expense did a great job of doing all of that. He entered some things that were kind of wrong, but because of a foible in the way Fidelity did the calculation, their calculation was actually accurate by accident. And thankfully he was okay and he can retire when he wants to and things like that. When people hire us, this is kind of what we do looking at the whole retirement thing is if I can give myself a shameless plug on this, this is what we do for a living is look at these situations and measure out what are the expenses, what are the resources, and are the resources great enough to carry those expenses for the next 20, 30, 40 years? That's really the key. You're only going to retire once. I've retired a couple of hundred times over the last 30 years. I haven't counted. I should count someday how many clients we've walked through retirement. So it's rare that I haven't seen something that's happened. It would shock me to see, wow, that's different in terms of retirement analysis. We have been there and this is what we do. Realistically, even with my clients that have the most money, that have done the most preparation, that save the most money, that their expenses are the lowest and their assets are gigantic, they still have that anxiety though. I will tell you, you won't get rid of all of it, but having somebody that can walk with you, especially who's not part of your cohort, that I'm still using that word, aren't I? I hate that I'm using that word. Your group, I'll use group, that they're not any more of an expert than you are. They're just going. Having an expert that knows what's going on is vitally important to make sure that you retire successfully. And that's what it's about. It's your successful retirement. That's what we're here for, is to make sure that all of your retirement dreams, whatever they are, have the best chance of coming true. So I encourage you, if you have questions, if this is one of those issues that's kind of resonated with you, jump down in the show notes. There's a way to contact us through our website and through our various social media platforms. Get in touch. Let's talk. Let's figure this out for you to reduce this anxiety and get you more set for retirement. If you have other questions on anything financial related, jump down there as well. If you get a chance, if you're listening to this on your favorite podcast app, make sure you like us, make sure you subscribe, make sure you give us a great rating because we really appreciate that. So that's it for this week. Stay safe out there.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. Remember, the views expressed are not necessarily those of Successful Money Strategies. All content is for educational purposes only and should not be construed as an endorsement of any third party or their views, or as a solicitation or offer to sell securities or provide investment, tax, legal, or consulting services. We believe the information presented to be reliable, but it is not guaranteed for accuracy or completeness. Investing involves risk, including the potential loss of principal. Hypothetical returns do not reflect actual trading and may not be indicative of the performance of any specific investment. Always consult with a qualified financial advisor before making any investment decisions. Past performance is not a guarantee of future results. Additional information, including management fees and expenses, is provided on our Form ADV Part 2, available upon request, or at the SEC's Investment Advisor Public Disclosure website, https://advisorinfo.sec.gov.